The first time they looked into each other's eyes, neither of them knew they had already changed the fate of two worlds forever. He had gone out before sunrise, hoping to catch enough fish to feed the small coastal village that depended on him. She had risen from the deepest part of the ocean, drawn by a strange feeling she could not explain. The sea was calm, the morning air carried nothing but silence, and for one impossible moment, a human and a mermaid simply stared at each other as though they had known one another for a lifetime. Then everything changed. The waves suddenly grew violent without warning, the sky darkened, and the sea seemed determined to pull them apart before they could even speak. Neither of them realized that the ocean itself had recognized something ancient awakening between them. No one in the village had ever questioned why Ethan preferred fishing alone. While others believed the sea was generous only to those who respected it from a distance, Ethan treated the ocean as though it were family. Every sunrise found him rowing farther than anyone else dared to travel, guided only by instinct and years of experience. The older fishermen often warned him that strange things happened beyond the rocky cliffs where the water turned an unusual shade of blue. Boats disappeared without explanation, mysterious songs echoed through the fog, and shadows larger than whales sometimes moved beneath the surface before vanishing into the darkness below. Ethan had heard every story since childhood, yet none of them ever frightened him enough to stay away. He believed every tale had a reasonable explanation, even if nobody else did. What he did not know was that every journey he had taken over the past several months had quietly been watched by someone hidden beneath the waves. Far below the surface lived a kingdom no human had ever been allowed to see. Towers of glowing coral stretched toward the light above, enormous sea turtles carried royal guards across underwater highways, and schools of shimmering fish moved together like living curtains protecting the palace from strangers. At the center of this magnificent kingdom lived Serena, the youngest daughter of the Mermaid Queen. Unlike the warriors who proudly trained for battle or the nobles who believed humans were dangerous creatures incapable of kindness, Serena could never understand why the surface world had become forbidden. Since she was a child, she had secretly collected objects that drifted into the sea. Tiny music boxes, silver necklaces, children's toys, handwritten letters sealed inside bottles, and faded family photographs fascinated her. Every object carried a story from the human world, and each story made her wonder whether the people above were truly as cruel as everyone claimed. Engage in our comment section, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location below. And subscribe now so you never miss any of our new videos. Her curiosity became impossible to hide. While the royal family discussed strengthening the borders between sea and land, Serena often disappeared without permission, swimming closer to the coastline than any princess was allowed. Hidden behind towering rocks, she watched children laugh as they chased waves along the beach. She watched families gather around fires after sunset. She watched young couples promise one another forever beneath the stars. Every visit made one thing clear. Humans were capable of love. Humans cried when they lost someone. Humans protected those they cared about. They looked remarkably similar to her own people despite the obvious differences. Each secret visit planted another question inside her heart. If humans and mermaids shared the same emotions, why had they become enemies? One evening, as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon, Serena heard singing unlike anything she had experienced before. It was not magical. It carried no enchantment. It was simply the voice of a lonely young man sitting alone in his small fishing boat while repairing a torn net. The melody drifted across the water with such quiet sadness that Serena found herself swimming closer without realizing it. She stayed hidden beneath the surface, listening as Ethan sang about losing both of his parents to the sea years earlier. He sang about hope, about believing tomorrow always brought another chance, and about refusing to hate the ocean even after it had taken everything from him. Serena remained completely still. Every word reached her heart. She had expected humans to curse the sea. Instead, this man thanked it for allowing him to survive another day. From that evening onward, Serena returned night after night. Ethan never noticed the pair of glowing blue eyes watching him from beneath the gentle waves. She learned his routines before he even realized someone had been following him. She watched him rescue trapped seabirds instead of ignoring them. She smiled as he returned small fish to the ocean because they were too young to keep. When storms approached, he warned nearby fishermen before thinking about his own safety. Every act of kindness slowly destroyed everything Serena had been taught about the surface world. She began wondering what would happen if she spoke to him. The thought terrified her, yet it refused to leave. Meanwhile, deep inside the royal palace, concerns spread quickly among the elders. Ancient sea creatures had started behaving strangely. Massive whales changed their migration routes without explanation. Dolphins refused to approach the sacred temple beneath the eastern reef. Even the glowing coral surrounding the palace had begun shining brighter every passing night. The oldest oracle studied ancient carvings etched into stone walls thousands of years earlier. One faded inscription described a forbidden union between sea and land that would one day produce a child capable of commanding every living creature beneath the ocean. The prophecy had remained untouched for centuries because everyone believed it could never happen again. Yet the signs surrounding the kingdom suggested something long forgotten was beginning to awaken. The Mermaid Queen dismissed the oracle's concerns at first. She believed the changing tides were simply part of nature. But when reports arrived that her youngest daughter had once again disappeared near the human coastline, her confidence began to weaken. She immediately ordered the royal guards to follow Serena without revealing themselves. Their mission was simple: discover what had drawn the princess toward the surface so often, and eliminate any threat before it endangered the kingdom. The guards obeyed without question, unaware that the greatest threat was neither a monster nor an invading army. It was two lonely hearts that had not yet exchanged a single word. The following morning, Ethan prepared for another fishing trip, completely unaware that someone had spent the entire night thinking about him. Thick fog rolled across the water, hiding the horizon from view. Most fishermen chose to remain ashore, believing conditions were too dangerous, but Ethan trusted his instincts and pushed farther into the open sea. As the hours passed, an unusual silence settled over the water. No birds flew overhead. No fish disturbed the surface. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Then, without warning, his fishing net caught something impossibly heavy. At first he smiled, convinced he had finally found the largest catch of his life. He pulled harder. The ropes tightened until his hands began to bleed. Whatever was trapped beneath the water suddenly pulled back with unbelievable force, dragging his entire boat toward the deep. Ethan struggled to cut the rope before the boat capsized, but it was already too late. A powerful wave crashed against the side, throwing him into the freezing ocean. He fought desperately to reach the surface, but invisible currents wrapped around his legs and pulled him farther downward. His lungs burned. His strength faded. The sunlight above grew dimmer with every passing second. Just as he accepted that this would be his final moment, he saw someone swimming toward him faster than any creature he had ever imagined possible. Long silver hair floated around her like moonlight beneath the sea. Brilliant blue eyes locked onto his with unmistakable urgency. She reached for his hand. For one breathtaking moment, time itself seemed to stop. Neither fear nor confusion remained. There was only the impossible certainty that they had finally found each other. But hidden behind towering rocks, several pairs of glowing eyes had witnessed everything, and, before either of them could escape the depths, the royal guards began closing in. The royal guards moved through the water with astonishing speed, their silver spears reflecting the faint light filtering down from the surface as they surrounded Serena before she could carry Ethan to safety. They had watched the princess from a distance for weeks, believing she was merely satisfying her curiosity about humans, but nothing had prepared them for the sight of her reaching for a human's hand with genuine concern in her eyes. One of the guards raised his weapon and ordered her to step away immediately, reminding her that the laws of the sea had forbidden any contact with humans for generations. Serena ignored him completely. She could see Ethan's eyes slowly closing as the last of the air escaped his lungs, and she knew that if she hesitated even for another second, he would die before ever learning her name. Without waiting for permission, She wrapped one arm around his body and swam toward the surface with every ounce of strength she possessed. The guards rushed after her, but none of them dared strike the princess while she held the unconscious fisherman. They broke through the crashing waves just as another storm rolled across the horizon. Serena dragged Ethan toward a narrow stretch of sand hidden between towering cliffs where fishermen rarely landed their boats. She gently laid him on the wet shore, but he remained completely still. His face had turned pale, and his breathing had stopped. Panic spread across Serena's face. Everything she had learned about humans told her that she had only moments left to save him. She placed her trembling hand against his cheek, whispered an ancient blessing passed down through the royal bloodline, and then leaned forward until her lips met his. The kiss carried no spell of romance, only the sacred breath of the sea itself. A glowing stream of blue light flowed from her into Ethan as the waves rushed around them. For several terrifying seconds, nothing happened. Then Ethan suddenly coughed violently, rolled onto his side, and gasped for air as seawater poured from his lungs. Serena smiled through tears of relief, unaware that the moment their lips touched, the ocean beneath them released a pulse of ancient energy that traveled farther than either of them could possibly imagine. Ethan slowly opened his eyes, struggling to understand what had happened. The first thing he saw was the face of the mysterious young woman kneeling beside him. Her beauty seemed almost unreal. Her long silver hair shimmered beneath the moonlight, and tiny drops of seawater sparkled across her skin like scattered diamonds. He tried to sit up, but dizziness forced him back onto the sand. For several silent moments they simply looked at each other, neither able to find the right words. Ethan finally whispered that she had saved his life. Serena hesitated before quietly admitting that she could not have allowed him to disappear beneath the sea. Ethan thanked her again, then noticed the edge of her shimmering tail where the waves touched the shore. Every story he had heard as a child suddenly returned to him, yet none of them matched the gentle soul sitting before him. Fear never appeared in his eyes. Instead, he found himself overwhelmed by wonder. The creature he had been taught to fear had risked everything to save a stranger. Serena expected him to run the moment he realized what she truly was, but instead he smiled with quiet gratitude. He asked her if she had a name. The question caught her completely off guard because no human had ever spoken to her with such kindness. She softly answered, "Serena." Ethan repeated her name as though he never wanted to forget it. Then he introduced himself. The simplicity of that exchange erased every lesson Serena had been taught about humans. There was no hatred, no violence, no attempt to capture her. There were only two lonely souls meeting in the silence of the night. They spoke for what felt like only minutes, yet the moon had climbed high into the sky before either of them realized how much time had passed. Ethan told her about the village where he had grown up and the parents he had lost years earlier. Serena listened carefully, her heart aching as she realized that grief existed both above and below the sea. When Ethan asked about her own family, she looked away toward the dark horizon and quietly admitted that some stories were too dangerous to tell. Far beneath the ocean, the royal guards returned to the palace carrying news that shook the entire kingdom. The Mermaid Queen listened without interrupting as they described Serena rescuing the fisherman and willingly revealing herself to him. Her expression remained calm until the captain mentioned the kiss that had restored the human's life. At that moment, every advisor inside the royal court fell silent. The queen slowly rose from her throne and walked toward the enormous stained shell that displayed the history of their people. Hidden within its ancient carvings was a forgotten warning that few believed anymore. It spoke of a royal mermaid whose heart would one day bind itself to a human. Their union would awaken powers sleeping beneath the deepest trenches of the ocean. The queen had dismissed the prophecy as a legend throughout her entire life, yet now the timing felt impossible to ignore. She ordered the guards to bring Serena back immediately, no matter what explanation her daughter offered. Unaware that danger was already closing in, Serena continued meeting Ethan whenever darkness covered the sea. Each evening their conversations lasted longer than the night before. Ethan spoke about dreams he had never shared with anyone. Serena laughed more than she ever had inside the royal palace. She asked endless questions about the stars because from beneath the ocean they appeared distant and unreachable. Ethan taught her the names of constellations, and she told him how the currents beneath the sea formed invisible roads that guided every creature home. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments where words were unnecessary because their eyes said everything. Days became weeks, and neither of them noticed how completely they had become part of each other's lives. Ethan found himself finishing every day's work as quickly as possible so he could return to the cliffs before sunset. Serena secretly counted the hours until she could leave the palace again. The peaceful rhythm of their meetings came to an abrupt end one evening when Ethan arrived at the shore, but Serena never appeared. The tide rolled in and out for hours while he searched every corner of the coastline. He called her name until his voice grew hoarse, yet only the crashing waves answered him. Unknown to Ethan, Serena had been locked inside her chambers after the royal guards returned. The queen confronted her directly, demanding to know whether the reports were true. Serena refused to deny them. She admitted that the fisherman possessed a kindness she had never encountered among many of her own people. The queen's disappointment quickly turned into anger. She reminded Serena that humans had once hunted mermaids for their scales, their tears, and the ancient pearls they carried. She insisted that no good could ever come from trusting someone who belonged to the surface world. Serena quietly replied that perhaps both kingdoms had spent centuries believing stories without ever searching for the truth. Those words echoed through the royal chamber like an unforgivable challenge. The queen warned her daughter that if she ever met the fisherman again, she would lose every right to inherit the throne. For the first time in her life, Serena questioned whether a crown was worth sacrificing her own heart. Late that night, she escaped the palace through a forgotten underwater passage known only to members of the royal family. She swam faster than ever before, praying Ethan had not given up waiting for her. When she finally reached the shore, she found him sitting alone on the rocks, staring silently across the water. The moment he saw her, relief flooded his face. He stood and hurried toward the edge of the waves without thinking about the danger. Serena apologized for disappearing, but before she could explain, Ethan gently took her hand. He told her he had feared the sea had taken her away forever. His voice carried so much emotion that Serena felt tears forming in her eyes. No one had ever worried about losing her simply because they loved her company. In that quiet moment, every wall around their hearts finally collapsed. The distance between them disappeared. Ethan slowly lifted his hand to Serena's face, giving her every chance to step away if she wished. Instead, she moved closer until their foreheads touched. The sound of the waves faded into silence. Their second kiss was completely different from the first. This time it was not given to save a life. It was born from affection neither of them could hide any longer. The ocean responded instantly. Rings of glowing blue light spread across the water for miles in every direction. Schools of fish circled beneath them as though celebrating. Dolphins surfaced and sang into the night. Far below, ancient coral that had remained dark for centuries suddenly burst into brilliant light. Hidden beneath layers of stone inside a forgotten underwater temple, mysterious symbols awakened one after another, illuminating an enormous carving that had remained untouched since the beginning of recorded history. Deep within that sacred temple, an elderly oracle who had guarded the ancient prophecy for decades slowly opened his eyes. He looked toward the glowing carvings and whispered with quiet dread that the bond had finally been sealed. The child spoken of in the oldest legends was no longer a distant possibility. Destiny had begun moving exactly as the prophecy foretold. Before the oracle could leave the temple to warn the royal family, another figure stepped out from the darkness. His face remained hidden beneath a hood woven from black seaweed, but his voice carried unmistakable confidence. He had waited his entire life for this moment. He smiled as he looked upon the glowing prophecy and quietly declared that if a child of two worlds was truly coming, then that child would belong to him. And as the blood-red moon slowly began rising over the ocean for the first time in centuries, neither Ethan nor Serena realized that their kiss had awakened forces far older and far more powerful than either kingdom had ever imagined. The blood-red moon continued its slow climb above the horizon, casting a crimson reflection across the endless ocean as Ethan and Serena stood together, completely unaware that every heartbeat was carrying them closer to a future neither of them could escape. They remained on the shoreline until the first light of dawn painted the sky, reluctant to say goodbye even for a single day. Neither of them spoke about the danger surrounding their relationship because, for those few precious hours, nothing else seemed to exist beyond the sound of the waves and the warmth of each other's presence. Ethan finally promised that no matter what happened, he would return to the same place every evening until she came back. Serena smiled softly and reached into the water beside her before placing a shimmering blue pearl in his hand. She explained that it had belonged to her since childhood and that among her people, giving someone such a treasure meant placing complete trust in them. Ethan closed his fingers around the glowing pearl as though it were the most valuable gift he had ever received. He quietly promised that as long as he carried it, part of her would always remain close to his heart. As the days passed, the quiet friendship between them transformed into a love neither could hide. Every meeting drew them closer together. Ethan began bringing small gifts collected from the shoreline, polished seashells, hand-carved wooden birds, delicate bracelets woven from fishing rope, and tiny flowers that somehow survived the salty air. Serena laughed each time he presented them, insisting that no royal jewel in the underwater kingdom had ever meant as much to her as the simple treasures he found with his own hands. In return, she introduced him to the hidden wonders beneath the sea. Holding tightly to his hands, she used ancient sea magic to surround him with a shimmering bubble that allowed him to breathe underwater for a short time. Together they explored glowing coral forests, swam alongside giant sea turtles older than recorded history, and watched schools of luminous fish dance through underwater caves where sunlight broke into thousands of sparkling beams. Ethan realized the ocean he had spent his entire life fishing upon was only a tiny fraction of a magnificent world hidden beneath its surface. Serena found joy in watching his amazement because she was seeing her own home through human eyes for the very first time. Their growing happiness did not remain hidden for long. The royal guards continued watching from a distance, returning each evening with reports that became more troubling than the last. They described long conversations, shared laughter, gentle embraces, and the unmistakable tenderness that existed between the princess and the fisherman. The mermaid queen listened in silence, but every report weighed more heavily upon her heart. She had spent years preparing Serena to one day inherit the throne, believing her daughter would protect their kingdom above everything else. Instead, Serena was slowly giving her heart to someone the kingdom considered an enemy. Even so, the queen hesitated to punish her own child. She secretly hoped the fascination would fade with time. Yet deep within her heart, she feared the prophecy more than she feared humans. The ancient stories never described love as the greatest danger. They warned that love itself would awaken a power capable of reshaping both worlds forever. While concern spread through the underwater kingdom, Ethan's closest friend began noticing changes in him as well. Caleb had known Ethan since childhood and immediately realized something extraordinary had happened. Ethan no longer returned from fishing exhausted or discouraged. Instead, he carried a quiet happiness that could not be explained. He often smiled to himself while repairing his nets and stared toward the ocean even when no boats remained on the water. One evening, Caleb jokingly accused him of secretly falling in love. Ethan laughed at first, but soon admitted that he had met someone unlike anyone he had ever known. Caleb eagerly demanded to meet the mysterious woman, but Ethan gently refused, explaining that the timing was not right and that revealing her identity could place her in terrible danger. Caleb respected his friend's wishes, although curiosity remained in the back of his mind. He had no idea that Ethan's secret would soon place the entire village in unimaginable danger. Several weeks later, Serena arrived at their usual meeting place carrying an expression Ethan had never seen before. She appeared anxious, glancing repeatedly toward the open sea as though expecting someone to emerge from the darkness at any moment. Ethan immediately sensed something was wrong. Serena finally confessed that her mother had discovered everything. She explained the ancient laws separating humans from mermaids and admitted that if the royal family learned she had continued seeing him, the punishment would be severe. Ethan listened carefully before taking both of her hands into his own. He told her that if being together meant placing her life at risk, he would disappear from her life forever rather than become the reason she suffered. Serena immediately shook her head. She admitted that she had tried convincing herself to stay away, but every attempt only made her realize how deeply she loved him. She had crossed countless oceans during her life, yet somehow the greatest distance she had ever faced was the thought of living without him. Their confession changed everything. There was no uncertainty left between them. They embraced as though afraid the world might separate them at any moment. Ethan gently lifted Serena into his arms as the waves curled around their feet, and beneath the crimson glow of the moon they shared another long, heartfelt kiss. Neither realized that far beneath them, every sacred pearl inside the ancient temple suddenly floated into the air, glowing brighter than they had in thousands of years. The elderly oracle rushed through the temple in disbelief, watching ancient symbols illuminate across the stone walls one after another. At the center of the chamber, a massive carving slowly revealed words hidden beneath centuries of coral. The prophecy had reached its next stage. It no longer spoke only of love between sea and land. It now declared that the first heartbeat of the child of two worlds had begun. That same night Serena returned to the palace feeling strangely different. She could not explain the unusual warmth spreading through her body or the gentle glow beneath her skin. Days later those feelings became impossible to ignore. The royal healers examined her in complete silence before exchanging worried glances with one another. Finally, the oldest healer lowered her head before the queen and quietly announced that the princess was carrying a child. The words echoed through the royal chamber like thunder. Every advisor present froze in disbelief. The mermaid queen remained motionless for several long moments before asking a single question. Was the father human? The healer reluctantly nodded. The queen closed her eyes as though the answer confirmed her greatest fear. Across the kingdom, whispers spread rapidly from one household to another. Some believed the child would unite the kingdoms. Others believed it would bring about the destruction of everything they had ever known. News of the pregnancy never reached Ethan because Serena was forbidden from leaving the palace. Royal guards surrounded her chambers day and night while the queen consulted the oldest records preserved inside the sacred archives. Every scroll spoke of the same terrifying possibility. A child born from both sea and land would inherit abilities unlike any creature before it. Such a child could command tides, communicate with every living being beneath the ocean, and possess powers capable of challenging even the royal bloodline. The queen desperately searched for another interpretation, but every document led to the same conclusion. If the prophecy proved true, the child would become the center of a conflict neither kingdom could survive unchanged. Meanwhile, hidden within the forgotten temple, the mysterious hooded figure continued watching events unfold exactly as he had hoped. Unlike the queen, he welcomed the prophecy with quiet excitement. For years he had searched for a way to seize control of the oceans without challenging the royal family directly. Now destiny itself had presented him with the perfect opportunity. He revealed his face for the first time, exposing the cold features of Lord Kael, the queen's younger brother, a prince who had long ago been stripped of his title after attempting to seize the throne through forbidden sea magic. Banished to the deepest trenches, Kael had spent decades studying powers the royal family feared to even mention. He knew the prophecy better than anyone alive, and he understood one truth the queen had overlooked. The child would not simply possess extraordinary power. Whoever controlled the child could command every ancient creature sleeping beneath the ocean floor. Kael gathered the followers who had remained loyal to him throughout his exile and revealed his plan. He ordered them to remain hidden until the child was born. There would be no need to attack the palace or wage war against humans immediately. Instead, they would allow Ethan and Serena's love to continue exactly as destiny intended. Once the child entered the world, Kael would take it for himself before either kingdom understood what had happened. His followers accepted the plan without hesitation, believing that the arrival of the prophesied child would finally allow them to overthrow the Mermaid Queen and rule both sea and land together. Above the ocean, Ethan continued waiting every evening beside the same rocky shoreline, believing Serena had simply been delayed. One sunset turned into another, then another, until nearly 3 weeks had passed without any sign of her. He refused to believe she had abandoned him. Every night he held the glowing blue pearl she had given him and silently prayed that wherever she was, she remained safe. On the 21st evening, just as hope began slipping away, the pearl suddenly pulsed with brilliant light inside his hand. The surrounding waves rose unnaturally high despite the absence of wind, and a familiar voice whispered his name from somewhere beyond the darkness. Ethan rushed toward the water, unaware that the moment he answered that call, every choice he made afterward would lead directly to a war capable of changing the fate of humans and mermaids forever. The glowing pearl pulsed faster with every passing second until its blue light became bright enough to illuminate the entire shoreline. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding as Serena's voice echoed faintly across the water. It was not carried by the wind, nor did it sound like an ordinary call. It felt as though the ocean itself had learned her voice and was delivering it directly to him. Without hesitation, Ethan stepped into the cold waves, following the light wherever it led. The deeper he walked, the stronger the pearl glowed, until suddenly the sea became perfectly still. Every crashing wave disappeared. Every seabird fell silent. Then, just ahead of him, the surface of the ocean slowly parted. Serena emerged from the water, but the joy Ethan expected to see in her eyes had been replaced by quiet sorrow. Before he could speak, she rushed into his arms and held him so tightly that he immediately understood something terrible had happened. Neither of them spoke for several long moments. They simply remained together, both knowing that every second they shared had become more precious than ever before. When Serena finally found the strength to speak, her voice trembled. She confessed everything she had hidden from him. She told him that her family had discovered their relationship, that she had been forbidden from ever seeing him again, and that the punishment awaiting both of them would be severe if they continued. Ethan listened without interrupting, but he noticed she was still holding one secret close to her heart. Gently lifting her chin, he asked what else she was afraid to tell him. Tears filled Serena's eyes before she slowly placed one hand against her stomach. Ethan stared in silence as she whispered the words that changed his life forever. They were going to have a baby. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. Ethan looked at her with complete disbelief before an overwhelming smile spread across his face. He carefully placed both hands over hers and laughed through tears of joy. Every dream he had ever imagined suddenly became insignificant compared to the miracle standing before him. He promised that no matter what happened, he would protect both her and their child with his life. Serena wanted to believe him, but fear refused to leave her heart. She explained the prophecy that had haunted her kingdom for generations. Their child was believed to possess unimaginable abilities, powers that could unite kingdoms or destroy them forever. Ethan admitted he knew nothing about prophecies or ancient legends. To him, their child was simply their child, deserving of love before anything else. He refused to believe destiny alone should decide the future of an innocent life. Serena smiled softly because his words reminded her why she had fallen in love with him. He never saw people as monsters or miracles. He simply saw them as people. For the first time since learning she was pregnant, hope returned to her heart. Together they decided they would face whatever came next as a family, regardless of whether humans or mermaids accepted them. Unknown to them, several royal guards had followed Serena once again. Hidden behind towering rocks, they witnessed every embrace and every word exchanged between the lovers. Their captain immediately returned to the underwater palace, where the Mermaid Queen waited anxiously for news. The moment she heard that Serena was carrying the fisherman's child and had secretly met him again, the Queen's final hope disappeared. She ordered every entrance leading from the royal palace sealed and declared that from that day forward, No member of the royal family would have any contact with the human world. Secretly, however, another command was issued only to her most trusted warriors. They were to locate the child immediately after birth and bring the infant back to the palace, whether Serena agreed or not. The queen convinced herself this was the only way to protect both kingdoms, but deep within her heart she knew she was preparing to break her own daughter's heart forever. Days later, Ethan returned to his village with a happiness he could no longer hide. Caleb immediately noticed the change and jokingly demanded to know the reason behind his constant smile. This time Ethan decided to tell him the truth, though not every detail. He admitted he had fallen deeply in love with someone extraordinary and that they were expecting a child together. Caleb embraced his friend with genuine excitement, promising to stand beside him through whatever challenges lay ahead. Yet not everyone in the village shared Caleb's kindness. Rumors had already begun spreading that Ethan had been seen talking alone beside the cliffs every night. Some villagers whispered that grief had finally driven him into madness after losing his parents years earlier. Others believed he had encountered dangerous spirits living beneath the sea. Their quiet suspicions slowly grew into fearful conversations, and before long, the village elder decided to investigate for himself. One evening, the elder secretly followed Ethan to the shoreline. Hidden among the rocks, he witnessed Serena rise gracefully from the ocean before embracing the young fisherman. The elderly man nearly collapsed from shock. Every frightening tale he had heard as a child suddenly seemed real. He hurried back to the village convinced that a mermaid had placed Ethan under a powerful enchantment. By sunrise, the entire community had learned the story. Fear spread quickly. Some demanded that Ethan be rescued before it was too late. Others insisted the mysterious sea woman should be hunted before she lured more people into the ocean. Caleb desperately tried convincing everyone that there had to be another explanation, but panic had already begun replacing reason. While fear grew among humans, tension inside the underwater kingdom reached its highest point. Serena's pregnancy advanced rapidly, far more quickly than anyone expected. The royal healers explained that children carrying both human and mermaid blood developed differently because they belonged to neither world completely. Strange events accompanied every passing week. Whales gathered outside the royal palace without being summoned. Dolphins refused to leave Serena's side whenever she entered the open sea. Even enormous sharks that normally frightened every creature in the kingdom quietly swam past her without showing the slightest sign of aggression. The unborn child appeared to be influencing the ocean before taking its very first breath. The elderly oracle watched these events with growing concern. Returning to the ancient temple, he carefully studied the glowing carvings once more. This time another section of the prophecy revealed itself. It spoke of the child's first cry awakening guardians older than the kingdoms themselves. These guardians had once protected the balance between sea and land before disappearing into the deepest trenches thousands of years earlier. The oracle immediately realized the prophecy had never promised peace or destruction. It promised choice. The child's future would depend entirely upon the hearts of those raising it. If surrounded by love, unimaginable hope would emerge. If consumed by hatred, the oceans themselves could become instruments of endless suffering. The oracle rushed to warn the queen, but before he reached the palace gates, he was intercepted by Lord Kael. Kael greeted the old oracle with an unsettling calmness. He admitted he had been waiting for him. The oracle demanded that Kael step aside, insisting the queen needed to hear the complete prophecy before it was too late. Kael simply smiled. He revealed that the queen already feared the child enough to separate it from its parents. That fear alone had already begun fulfilling the darker path described within the ancient writings. The oracle realized with horror that Kael had manipulated events from the beginning, quietly encouraging suspicion and mistrust while remaining hidden in the shadows. Before the oracle could escape, Kael summoned dark sea magic unlike anything seen in generations. Black currents wrapped around the elderly guardian, trapping him inside a prison of living coral deep beneath the forgotten temple. His final warning died unheard beneath the ocean floor. Weeks passed, and Ethan and Serena secretly prepared for the arrival of their baby. Ethan built a small wooden home overlooking the sea where they dreamed of raising their family together. He carved a tiny cradle with his own hands, polishing every piece of wood until it was perfectly smooth. Serena often watched him from the water, smiling as she imagined their child laughing inside the little house. They spoke endlessly about the future. Ethan dreamed of teaching their son or daughter how to fish beneath the morning sun. Serena dreamed of showing the child glowing coral gardens and introducing every magnificent creature living beneath the waves. Neither wanted the child forced to choose between being human or mermaid. They wanted their baby to belong to both worlds equally. But destiny was moving faster than either of them realized. On the night of another blood-red moon, Serena suddenly cried out in pain as powerful waves surged violently around the shoreline. Ethan rushed to her side, immediately understanding that the child had chosen that very moment to enter the world. At the exact same instant, every sacred pearl within the underwater temple shattered into brilliant streams of light. The ocean trembled. Ancient sea creatures opened their eyes after centuries of silence. Far beyond the horizon, massive whirlpools appeared without warning. Both kingdoms sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. The Mermaid Queen gathered thousands of royal warriors and ordered them toward the surface. In the human village, frightened fishermen watched the ocean glow an unnatural blue and reached for their harpoons, believing an invasion had begun. Hidden beneath the deepest trench, Lord Kael slowly rose from the darkness with an army of loyal followers behind him. Smiling with absolute confidence, he whispered that the child of prophecy was finally about to be born, and, before the first sunrise touched the sea, every kingdom would be willing to kill for the newborn they had not yet seen. The blood-red moon stood directly above the ocean, as if the heavens themselves had paused to witness the birth of a child destined to change history. Ethan knelt beside Serena on the secluded shoreline, refusing to leave her side despite the violent waves crashing around them. The sea no longer behaved like water. It rose in towering walls before suddenly falling silent, as though every current was waiting for a single moment. Serena struggled to remain calm, gripping Ethan's hand with surprising strength while whispering that whatever happened next, he must never allow anyone to take their child. Ethan looked into her frightened eyes and made the only promise that mattered. He swore that as long as he was alive, their family would never be separated. The moment those words left his lips, a brilliant flash of golden light burst from the ocean, illuminating the coastline brighter than daylight. Every creature in the sea seemed to stop moving at once, and then, beneath the crimson glow of the moon, their child entered the world. For one breathtaking second, complete silence covered the shoreline. The newborn did not cry immediately. Instead, the tiny infant slowly opened glowing golden eyes that reflected both the stars above and the endless ocean beneath them. Ethan carefully lifted the baby into his arms, overwhelmed by a love so powerful it stole every word from his mouth. Serena smiled through tears, gently touching the child's tiny face. The baby looked completely human at first, but as the moonlight touched the infant's skin, delicate shimmering scales briefly appeared across the shoulders before fading away again. Then came the baby's first cry. It echoed across the sea with astonishing force. Hundreds of dolphins surfaced at once, circling the shoreline in perfect harmony. Massive whales emerged from the depths, releasing songs that rolled across the horizon. Thousands of glowing fish gathered around the beach until the water resembled a river of living stars. Even the crashing storm clouds began to separate, allowing moonlight to shine directly upon the little family. Ethan had never witnessed anything so beautiful. Serena knew immediately that the prophecy had awakened. Far beneath the surface, the entire underwater kingdom shook violently. Ancient coral towers glowed brighter than ever before, and every sacred bell inside the royal palace rang without anyone touching them. The Mermaid Queen rose from her throne before the first messenger could even arrive. She already knew the child had been born. Across the palace, frightened servants and royal guards rushed through the corridors as enormous sea creatures gathered outside the kingdom's borders. Creatures that had not been seen for centuries slowly emerged from forgotten trenches. Giant sea dragons with crystal blue scales circled the palace from a distance. Ancient turtles larger than ships swam silently beside glowing whales. None of them attacked. None of them showed aggression. They simply waited, responding to a call older than memory itself. The queen realized with growing concern that the prophecy had not exaggerated the child's influence. Every living creature beneath the ocean could already feel the newborn's existence. At that very moment, hidden within the deepest trench beyond the kingdom, Lord Kael stood surrounded by followers who had remained loyal to him throughout his years of exile. The moment the baby's cry echoed through the sea, Kael smiled with quiet satisfaction. He had waited decades for this night. He ordered his warriors to move immediately toward the shoreline before the royal army reached it first. Unlike the queen, Kael had no intention of protecting the child. He intended to control the child. He believed whoever raised the infant would one day command every ocean, every sea creature, and eventually every kingdom standing along the world's coastlines. To Kael, the child was not simply a baby. The child represented absolute power. Back on the shore, Ethan wrapped the newborn carefully inside a blanket he had brought for Serena. He laughed softly as the baby reached up and wrapped tiny fingers around his thumb. The child's glowing eyes slowly became an ordinary warm brown, and for a brief moment the extraordinary powers seemed to disappear completely. Ethan looked at Serena and whispered that perhaps the prophecies were wrong after all. Perhaps their son was simply a child who deserved a peaceful life. Serena wanted desperately to believe him. She leaned against his shoulder as they admired their baby together, silently imagining birthdays, bedtime stories, laughter filling their little home, and quiet mornings watching the sunrise as a family. It was a beautiful dream. Unfortunately, it lasted only a few moments. The peaceful silence shattered as dozens of royal mermaids burst from the waves, surrounding the shoreline in a perfect circle. Their silver armor reflected the moonlight while long spears remained lowered out of respect for the princess. The captain stepped forward and respectfully bowed before Serena. His voice carried genuine regret as he announced that he had come under direct orders from the Mermaid Queen. The child must return to the underwater kingdom immediately. Serena stood slowly, protecting the baby against her chest. She calmly replied that her son belonged with his parents. The captain lowered his head again before quietly explaining that if she refused, he had been ordered to take the child by force. Ethan instinctively stepped between the warriors and his family, holding nothing more than a simple fishing harpoon. Against an army of trained royal guards, he knew the weapon offered almost no protection. Even so, he never considered moving aside. Before either side could act, another voice echoed across the water. Caleb appeared at the edge of the beach with several villagers who had followed him after witnessing the strange lights above the ocean. They stopped in complete disbelief at the sight before them. Humans and mermaids stood facing one another beneath a blood-red moon while a newborn rested in the center of the growing conflict. Some villagers immediately raised their weapons in fear, believing the mermaids had come to attack. Others hesitated after noticing Serena shielding the child rather than threatening anyone. Caleb recognized Ethan instantly and shouted for everyone to lower their weapons. He insisted there had to be another way. His words prevented bloodshed for only a moment. Without warning, a violent explosion erupted beneath the sea. A massive column of black water shot into the sky as Lord Kael and his followers emerged from the depths riding enormous armored sea serpents. Unlike the Queen's royal guards, Kael's warriors wore dark armor etched with glowing crimson symbols. The ocean itself seemed to recoil from their presence. Kael's cold eyes locked onto the child, and a satisfied smile spread across his face. He congratulated Ethan and Serena on bringing the prophesied child into the world before calmly declaring that the baby no longer belonged to either of them. The child belonged to destiny. Ethan refused without hesitation. Serena stepped beside him, her tail shimmering beneath the waves as she prepared to defend her family. Even several of the Queen's guards exchanged uneasy glances, realizing Kael had become a far greater threat than the fishermen they had been sent to confront. Kael lifted one hand toward the ocean. Instantly, the water behind him erupted as gigantic shadow creatures rose from beneath the waves. Their glowing eyes burned through the darkness while jagged fins sliced across the surface. The villagers stumbled backward in terror. Even the royal guards tightened their formation. Kael laughed softly and reminded everyone that fear had always been easier to command than love. He gave Ethan one final opportunity to surrender the child peacefully. Ethan looked down at his sleeping son before quietly shaking his head. He answered that no amount of power, no kingdom, and no prophecy would ever convince a father to hand over his child. Those simple words echoed across the shoreline. Before Kael could strike, something remarkable happened. The baby slowly opened his golden eyes once again. Instead of crying, he smiled. A warm golden light spread gently from the child's tiny body across the beach and into the ocean. Every shadow creature froze where it stood. The enormous sea serpents lowered their heads peacefully. Even the frightened villagers felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over them. The baby's power had not awakened through anger. It had responded to the love surrounding him. For the first time in his life, uncertainty appeared on Kael's face. His dark magic had never failed him before. He quickly realized the child could not be controlled through fear alone. The Mermaid Queen arrived only moments later, rising from the sea aboard a magnificent chariot drawn by 4 ancient white whales. She looked first at Serena, then at Ethan, and finally at the sleeping baby whose gentle light continued calming every living creature nearby. The queen understood that she had reached a turning point that would decide the future of both kingdoms. Behind her stood thousands of loyal warriors. Before her stood her daughter, the man she loved, and the grandson she had never expected to have. Between them waited Lord Kael, whose growing army now stretched across the dark ocean like an approaching storm. The queen slowly raised her trident, and every warrior prepared for battle. But no one could have imagined that the greatest battle was no longer about winning a kingdom. It was about deciding whether fear or love would shape the future of a child born to unite 2 worlds. The ocean held its breath as the Mermaid Queen stood facing her daughter, the fisherman, the newborn child, and the army gathering behind Lord Kael. For several long seconds, no one moved. The only sound came from the gentle breathing of the baby resting peacefully in Serena's arms, completely unaware that 2 worlds stood on the edge of war because of him. Kael slowly stepped forward, his voice carrying across the water with chilling confidence. He reminded everyone that kingdoms had risen and fallen because rulers refused to surrender power willingly. He accused the queen of allowing her emotions to cloud her judgment and declared that the child's extraordinary abilities belonged to no family. They belonged to whoever possessed the strength to control them. The Mermaid Queen remained silent, studying the tiny child whose soft golden glow continued spreading across the sea. She remembered the first time she had held Serena as a baby and realized that somewhere along the years, fear had begun making decisions where love once had. For the first time since learning of the prophecy, she questioned whether she had been trying to protect her kingdom or simply protect herself from the unknown. Kael lost patience with the silence. Raising both hands toward the darkened sky, he unleashed forbidden sea magic that twisted the ocean into towering walls of black water. Enormous whirlpools formed around the shoreline, trapping the villagers, the royal guards, and Ethan's small fishing boat inside a circle of violent currents. His followers charged forward riding monstrous sea serpents, while shadow creatures surged toward the beach from every direction. The royal guards immediately formed a defensive line around the queen, but Serena broke away from them, placing herself beside Ethan without hesitation. She had made her choice long ago. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the man she loved. Ethan tightened his grip on the simple harpoon he had carried for years. Against creatures born from ancient magic, it seemed almost useless, yet he stood his ground because courage is often measured not by the weapon someone carries, but by the reason they refuse to run. The first clash shook the entire coastline. Villagers who had arrived with fear in their hearts suddenly found themselves fighting beside the very mermaids they had once believed were monsters. Royal warriors used shimmering shields of living water to protect human families from crashing waves, while experienced fishermen threw ropes and nets to rescue injured mermaids swept toward the rocks by Kael's unnatural currents. Caleb became one of the first to realize that survival depended upon trust rather than suspicion. Without hesitation, he pulled a wounded royal guard from the water, and together they helped frightened children reach higher ground. One by one, others followed their example. The hatred that had separated both worlds for generations began giving way to something stronger. They no longer saw enemies. They saw parents protecting children, friends rescuing strangers, and ordinary people risking everything for lives that only hours earlier they had been taught to fear. Kael roared with frustration as the unity before him weakened his dark magic. The more humans and mermaids helped one another, the less power his shadow creatures possessed. Refusing to accept defeat, he abandoned the battlefield and lunged directly toward Serena, determined to seize the child himself. Ethan intercepted him without hesitation. Kael's magic hurled the fisherman across the sand, but Ethan struggled back to his feet despite his injuries. Every time he fell, he rose again. Every blow reminded him of the promise he had made on the night his son was born. Serena desperately tried to reach Ethan while protecting the baby, but Kael's followers closed in around her. The queen and her guards fought fiercely to break through, yet the chaos of the battle separated everyone at the worst possible moment. Kael stretched out his hand, his fingers only inches away from the child, believing victory was finally his. The instant Kael touched the baby's blanket, the newborn opened his golden eyes. There was no cry, no scream. Only a calm expression that seemed impossibly wise for someone who had just entered the world. Warm golden light flowed gently from the child in every direction. It did not strike like lightning or explode with destructive force. Instead, it spread like the first rays of morning sunlight after a long night. Wherever the light reached, Kael's shadow creatures dissolved into shimmering droplets that fell harmlessly back into the sea. The raging whirlpools slowed until the water became calm once more. Even the sea serpents lowered themselves peacefully into the waves. The baby's power had never been created to dominate others. It existed to restore balance wherever fear had broken it. Kael refused to surrender. Drawing upon every fragment of forbidden magic he had gathered during decades of exile, he transformed before everyone's eyes. Dark scales spread across his body, enormous jagged fins erupted from his back, and his hands became massive claws capable of tearing through stone. His voice no longer sounded human or mermaid, but echoed like a storm rolling beneath the ocean floor. The villagers stepped back in terror as the monstrous figure towered above them. Yet the child remained completely calm. Ethan slowly stood beside Serena despite the pain coursing through his body. He gently placed one hand over hers, and together they looked at their son with complete trust rather than fear. Their love became the example everyone else followed. Humans lowered their weapons. Mermaids lowered their spears. Instead of answering Kael's hatred with more hatred, both kingdoms stood together as one family protecting the innocent life between them. The golden light surrounding the child grew brighter until it reflected across the entire ocean. Ancient sea dragons emerged from the deepest waters, not to attack, but to circle peacefully overhead. Giant whales released joyful songs that echoed across the horizon. Dolphins leaped through glowing waves while countless fish formed brilliant patterns beneath the surface. Every creature answered the same silent call. The ocean itself had made its choice. Kael unleashed one final attack, but the combined strength of both kingdoms stopped him. Human fishermen secured him with heavy nets, while royal mermaids wrapped him in enchanted chains forged from living coral. His own dark magic collapsed around him, leaving nothing but silence where his anger had once stood. Defeated at last, he was carried away to the deepest prison beneath the sea, where he could no longer threaten either world. As dawn finally broke over the horizon, the blood-red moon slowly faded from the sky, replaced by warm golden sunlight. The ocean that had nearly become a battlefield now shimmered peacefully beneath the morning light. The Mermaid Queen approached Ethan and Serena with tears glistening in her eyes. She looked at her grandson sleeping peacefully and quietly admitted that fear had almost cost her the very family she should have protected. Turning to Ethan, she thanked him for proving that courage and kindness could exist far beyond the borders of the sea. Then, before the eyes of both kingdoms, she embraced her daughter and welcomed Ethan into the royal family. The villagers watched in astonishment as the queen extended her hand toward the human fisherman, not as a ruler to a subject, but as a mother accepting the man who loved her daughter with unwavering devotion. In the months that followed, the impossible slowly became reality. The shoreline where the battle had taken place was transformed into a place where humans and mermaids met openly for the first time in generations. Fishermen learned which waters should remain protected, and mermaids guided lost ships safely home during dangerous storms. Children from both worlds grew up hearing stories not about hatred, but about the night love prevented a war that could have destroyed everything. Ethan and Serena built their home exactly where they had once dreamed, overlooking the sea that had first brought them together. Their son grew surrounded by both families, equally comfortable walking along sandy beaches and swimming through glowing coral forests. As the years passed, it became clear that his greatest gift was never the ability to calm storms or communicate with every creature beneath the ocean. His greatest gift was inspiring others to see beyond fear. Many years later, an old fisherman sat outside his seaside home watching the sunset beside the woman who had once saved his life beneath the waves. Their son, now a young boy with kind eyes and an adventurous spirit, laughed with friends from both the human village and the underwater kingdom. No one questioned where he belonged anymore because everyone understood the answer. He belonged to both worlds. Ethan smiled as Serena gently rested her head against his shoulder, just as she had done on the night she told him they were expecting a child. The ocean rolled quietly onto the shore, carrying with it the same peaceful melody that had first drawn two lonely hearts together. Some people would later call their story a legend. Others would insist it was only a fairy tale whispered by sailors beneath the stars. But every generation that gathered along that coastline remembered one truth above all else. The greatest power the child of prophecy ever possessed was never magic. It was the love that united two worlds that had spent far too long believing they could never become one. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what you think was the most unforgettable moment. Do you believe love really can overcome generations of fear and division? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this unforgettable journey, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because our next story will take you into another world where destiny, sacrifice, and impossible love collide in ways you will never forget.